Hello, everybody. Today we are going to read The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khushbant Singh. Before I start you teaching this chapter line by line, let me tell you the introduction of this chapter. The Portrait of a Lady is a part of an autobiography by Khushbant Singh. In this story, the author draws a pen portrait of his grandmother. He beautifully unfolds their relationship and how it undergoes several changes. In other words, the story is a loving tribute from a grandson to his grandmother. The story gives a picture of human relationships. It is a realistic account of how the grandparents give all their time, attention, and love to their grandchildren. Now, let's start. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. Here, the author Khushwant Singh says about his grandmother that, like others' grandmother, his grandmother was old woman. Since when Khushwant Singh had seen her, she was old and her face was wrinkled. It means her face had lines on her face, and he knew her grandmother, what the grandmother for 20 years, and since 20 years she was old. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. Author says that I cannot believe that she had a husband one time and she was pretty and young when she was young. She was beautiful when she was young. It was very hard to believe. Khushbant Singh does not believe because Khushbant Singh has always seen her just old. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose fitting clothes. Here, Khushbant Singh says that about his grandfather, because his grandfather's picture was hung above the shelf above the fireplace, that is mantelpiece in his drawing room on the wall. He wore a big turban on his head and he was wearing very loose clothes. In that picture he could see his long white beard covered the best part of his chest and looked at least 100 years old. By seeing his picture, he looked like 100 years old, having just a big white beard, and most of the part of his chest was covered with white hair. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. By seeing him, no one can tell that what he would be having once wife and just children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. By looking at his picture, one can say that he must be having only a number of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. Okay, Nata says that my grandmother once had been beautiful. I cannot believe this, it haunts my mind. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of prophets she used to tell us. Grandmother used to tell what stories of her childhood. She did not like telling the stories of her childhood, but children, Khushbant Singh and his just siblings used to listen those stories of her of their grandmother, just as the story of what Sikh gurus, what Muhammad's Allah's. It means of like God. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. It means she was she was short heighted, she was somewhat plump, and she was slightly bent forward, and her face was full of wrinkles, creating crisscross shape spread over her face. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. Nata says that I cannot believe that once she had been pretty beautiful. I cannot believe old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. Nata says that she was old. She was very she was terribly old. Old, and Nata cannot believe that once she had been beautiful, because Nata had seen her in the same condition for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. It means she was beautiful by heart, not by physical appearance. She hobbled about the house in a spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and other telling the beads of her rosary. Rosary, it means a string of beads used for counting prayers as they are chanted. Okay. Stoop means bent body due to old age. It means Nata used to see her just moving. Yeah, hobbled means walked with difficulty, walking in the house wearing white sari. Okay, and in just her one hand just resting on her waist, and one hand to balance her stoop. It means to balance her bent body, and other used to just chant the prayers of the beads of a rosary. Her silver locks were scattered and tidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. It means her white hair, locks means part of hair, her white silver hair, what were spread over her just sad, pale face. Yeah, puckered means wrinkled face, and her lips always just chanted the prayer which was inaudible. You cannot hear that prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. The author says that she could never have been pretty, but she reflected a divine beauty. She was like a winter landscape in the mountains. I hope you understood up to here. Rest we will discuss in our next class. Thank you.